Hey everyone, welcome to the Coder's Couch podcast, where you're invited into the crazy life and thoughts of Jason. That's me, so that I can tell you a little bit about what's going on in my life as I enter this new, exciting season. In this episode, I talk about some of the new things I recently learned about addiction and recovery, and it might not be what you think. It certainly changed the way I view this topic, and I'm excited to share it with all of you. Let's go! All right, welcome back to the Coder's Couch. Wow, this is fun. This is like my first episode on my own since, oh boy, when was that? Either February or March. And as I record this, it's June. So, wow, this has been a while. Again, sorry for the delay. I often tell people that the point of this podcast is to chronicle my journey from software development into grad school, into counseling. And I've been too busy actually doing grad school, doing the assignments and going to class and doing all of the obligations that I have in front of me. Been too busy actually doing all of that to stop and talk about it. So my apologies. Sorry it has been so long. I hope you'll forgive me. I hope you understand. It has been busy and hectic. Got some good stuff coming up. Yeah, we got some things to look forward to for you guys to look forward to as well. I'm excited. But I wanted to, now that we're in the summer semester, I wanted to go back to the roots of this podcast and dive into some of the stuff I've been learning. So I've got another episode coming up soon. I've got another episode planned out that is going to recount some of the things I've been learning. But I really wanted to create a separate episode for this topic, for today's topic, because I think it's worth devoting an entire episode to. If I tried to shove it into an episode with some other topics, then I'd probably be shortchanging everybody, including myself, to talk about today's topic. Recently, I took a weekend class, a 1-credit class on ethics, and it just so happened to be on the ethics of treating addiction. Meanwhile, I'm also in a class about addictions counseling. So it has been really interesting to see the overlap between these two classes and wrestle with some new ideas and some old ideas, actually, about addiction that I wanted to share with all of you, because I think this is something, unless you're familiar with the addiction space, with recent breakthroughs in addictions treatment and how to approach recovery, things like that, this is probably something that's flown under your radar. And so I wanted to share it with all of you because it's a big deal. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, a lot of this is based on a TED Talk by Johann Hari. He's a British journalist and writer. I will link the TED Talk in the description if you want to go check it out for yourself. I would highly recommend it. It's very, very good. And then there's a documentary you can find it on YouTube. It was put out by PBS, I guess in association with Nova, and it's on addiction. That was very interesting as well. I will link all of that down in the description, wherever that is, depending on whatever platform you are listening on. But I want to talk about mostly this TED Talk. And so the TED Talk is titled, "Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong." Kind of intriguing, I think, right? So for over 100 years now, the U.S. has banned drugs. They've categorized drugs into here is what is legal and here's what is illegal and criminalized. And this has been in an effort thinking that if we can punish those who abuse these substances, if we can make some of these drugs illegal, that would deter people and prevent people from using and abusing them. But we have a major drug problem in the U.S. Some places in the US are worse than others, but I think we can all agree that there's a massive drug problem. And so it just doesn't seem to be working, this criminalization, banning, these punishments, all that stuff. And so Johann Hari decided to ask some questions. He said, I felt like I didn't know the answers to some very basic questions, such as what is addiction, what causes addiction, and how do you actually, treat it? And so he spent some time, he set off talked to loads of people in various parts of the world. He concluded, quote, almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong, end quote. And I am inclined to agree with him. Knowing kind of what I was raised with, this picture of drugs and drug users and drug addicts and how we should go about treating them and helping them become sober, things like that. Knowing what I was raised with and this picture I've had for a long, long time compared to what I've recently heard in the addiction space over the last couple of years and this TED Talk and some of the research underneath it, I agree. I think many of us have an inaccurate picture of addictions, of addiction treatment, of addiction recovery. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. And so he starts with, let's take a moment to look at what we know, what we think we know about addiction. So like take drugs like heroin, for example. Over time, if you take heroin, the chemicals inside heroin, your body will eventually become addicted to them, dependent on them, and then you'll be an addict, right? You'll crave these substances and your brain will need more and more, and then it's eventually desensitized, so you need more to get the same high, things like that, and then you're just, off the deep end. This idea of chemical dependency is one that we're probably pretty familiar with. But he said the first thing that tipped me off that something might be wrong about this picture is that if you have ever been in the hospital for like a major surgery or something like that, then you've probably been given some of these opioid painkillers. You've probably been given a form of these drugs that people then abuse on the streets. A very common one is morphine. Morphine is an opioid painkiller. You've probably heard of it, or maybe a derivative of morphine, diamorphine. If you Google diamorphine, you'll see, quote, diamorphine, and then in parentheses, also known as heroin, end quote. Like literally you're given heroin in the hospital, which is not really anything new. I knew that these drugs on the streets, these drugs you get from drug dealers, they are the same stuff, or I should say they are the same versions, although typically contaminated or diluted with other substances. They're the same thing that you get in the hospital. The interesting thing is, if you spend time in the hospital, you'll probably be in the hospital being given these drugs for a long enough time that in theory you would develop some dependence. And that is due in part because what you get in the hospital is much better stuff than what you could get on the streets. The stuff in the hospital is considered medically pure. And so it's much more potent, much more effective. And so what we would maybe think would happen is that if you go into the hospital and you get these painkillers, you would come out being a junkie, right? You go in and you've probably been given them long enough to have developed, in theory, this addiction to them or this dependency on them. So you'd come out and you would be hooked. But that doesn't happen. Or at least I don't know of any cases where that has happened. Maybe it's happened somewhere. But I've never heard of this happening to anybody I know. I've never heard any news stories about this. This just doesn't really happen. Certainly not the norm. I suppose I can point out my own experience. So back in 2017, my lung collapsed right before, between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, my lung collapsed. And so I went into the hospital and they put in chest tubes to take the air out of my chest cavity. And for at least part of my stay in the hospital, they gave me fentanyl. And so according to this documentary from Nova on PBS, and again, link in the description, fentanyl is up to 50 times stronger than heroin. And in the equivalent amount of 2 grains of salt, fentanyl will kill you, which is why it's typically mixed with other drugs. It decreases the lethal potency, and so they can then use fentanyl to treat you without making anything worse. That's why fentanyl is so easy to overdose on, because such a little amount will kill you. In my own experience, I've had fentanyl. You've probably heard it in the news. We have an epidemic. A lot of fentanyl is coming in from China, and people are just getting addicted. And then people are, if you, in the documentary, they said some of the emergency responders that were interviewed said, so if you have a batch coming in that is just happens to be particularly hot, then on a day you've got boom, one person goes down, boom, another person goes down, boom, another person goes down. You just have case after case after case of people ODing on fentanyl. And so what happened to me? Well, I had fentanyl, and I guess I can't remember how long it was, but I wasn't addicted to it. I didn't have any dependency on it. I was totally fine. Like, I left the hospital and didn't eat anything. Same thing with something like Vicodin. When I had my wisdom teeth removed, I had some Vicodin, and that was, managed my pain. I took the pills until I ran out, and then it's like, all right, well, I'm out, and I don't really need it anymore anyway. So cool, back to life as normal. So that's just my own experience. I have experienced this to be debunked, I guess, this myth that if you're exposed to the chemical for a long enough period of time, then you would develop this dependency, and that would drive you into addiction, that the chemical alone is strong enough to create this dependency and addiction, and that you're going to then be driven into using it and abusing it. And that was the same fear that people had when soldiers were overseas for the Vietnam War. Hari, in this TED Talk, says 20% of American troops were just using loads of heroin, loads of morphine and painkillers. And so if you look back at the news reports of the time, the news reports were afraid of this. They were like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when all these soldiers return home and we just have thousands of junkies on the street? And so the Archives of General Psychology did a detailed study, and they kept tabs on these soldiers who used all this morphine when they returned home. What happened? Well, 95% of them just completely stopped. Once they returned home to their civilian lives, they just stopped. They didn't need it anymore, and so they just returned back to normal functioning. And so that's another example that, maybe we should start to question this idea that the chemical alone is what's going to cause the addiction. So to further illustrate this, I think this for me was very, very reinforcing to this change in ideas that I'm having. This really kind of sealed the deal in my mind. So there were some previous experiments done in the 1900s that influenced our early ideas about addiction. And so the experiment was, if you place a rat in a cage with 2 water bottles, one of the water bottles has just normal water, the other one has water laced with drugs, laced with a solution of morphine, then what you'll see is that it doesn't take very long. The rat will try the water bottles, and it will inevitably prefer the one with drug-laced water. And so it will go back to compulsively drinking this water bottle until it eventually overdoses and dies. That's what we typically think of when we think addiction, is that you get this thing, you experience this high or the influence of this drug, and then you keep going back to it. And eventually, I mean, if there's no intervention, if there's nothing to stop it, then you're just going to keep taking it until eventually, and of course, if there's the escalation and you keep like upping the dose, eventually you will overdose and die. But in the 1970s, Canadian psychologist Dr. Bruce Alexander, he looked at these experiments and he noticed a couple of things. He noticed that in these experiments, the rat was alone. There were no other rats in the cage. It was just this lone rat in a cage, 2 water bottles. There was nothing for the rat to do. There's nothing for the rat to play with, no other rats for the rat to befriend. All the rat could do was just move around the cage and then drink from the water bottles. Just a very mundane experience and existence. So Dr. Alexander then did a new experiment. He built what he called Rat Park, which was a larger enclosure. It had a bunch of tunnels. It had colorful balls to play with, loads of cheese, and the most important part is that there were other rats to play and mate with. So in addition to this, he left in the 2 water bottles. He made them available to the rats. There was the water bottle with the water, and there's the water bottle with the drug solution. Now, if we think back, if the early pictures of addiction we have are true, that drug use itself leads to addiction, then we would expect to see the same results, that the rats will eventually, they'll try the water bottles at some point, and then they'll notice like, oh, the one with the drugs is way better, and so they keep using that until they eventually overdose and die. But what happened in Rat Park is that when the rats had other things to do, balls to play with, food to eat, other rats to connect with, No rats preferred the drugged water bottle. They actually didn't even like it, let alone compulsively use it. We go from 100% overdose and fatality rate with the first experiment to a 0% fatality rate with something like Rat Park. This led Dr. Alexander to conclude, as Hari mentions, that perhaps addiction isn't so much about the substances as it is about the cage. That the opposite of addiction, or the cure for addiction, isn't abstinence or sobriety. The cure for addiction is connection. Connection with others and connection with ourselves. So I want to go into that a little bit. Connection with others. Some questions to kind of just chew on. Do you have somebody you can do life with? Someone, maybe a romantic partner or a close friend, who's walking beside you through life? Do you have a gang of friends, either the girls or the boys, that you hang out with and have fun with? A group of friends where you can be yourself, you can let your shoulders drop. People you know and people who truly know you. Do you have a community you're involved with? Maybe this is a faith community, a gym community, a volunteer community, or a hobby community. People you can share something with that brings you all together. Now, if your answer to these questions is unfortunately no, I don't have somebody to connect with. I don't have a romantic partner to connect with. I don't have friends to share my life with. It is vital that we have that. We are made for connection. But I want to be transparent. Forming connections with others is so hard. It's really hard, especially if you're an introvert or if you've been burned by others in the past. It's scary to reach out for connection with someone else and then to risk that rejection. But we need it. We need to have this connection. We can't do life without it. This is what life coach Drew Boa calls a redemptive risk, stepping out into the space where we might get hurt again, but it's the only way to heal. Psychologist Dr. Tama Bryant said, "We were hurt in community and we need to be healed in community." And so whether you have been hurt in the past, I should say especially if you've been hurt in the past, or if you just don't have anybody, you find yourself with nobody around, we're going to need to take a step toward cultivating connection with others, finding some of this connection. So if you have some people around you, maybe a coworker or people in your church or gym or your class that you kind of know, people that maybe you would call them acquaintances, but not necessarily friends, this is a great opportunity. Now, in school, when we're growing up as kids and when we're in college, we kind of have automatic friends. We have people that we are surrounded with in class or in the dorms or in the apartments or wherever we are, we have kind of automatic friends built into the life experience that we're in. And so making friends isn't actually that hard. We become friends over time doing the same stuff in class, having recess together, playing games together, suffering through homework and class together. And so we just end up with these automatic bonds. But outside of that, outside of these life experiences, friends don't just drop into your lap. You're going to have to go make an effort to find them. And somebody is going to have to make the first move. Spoiler, it's probably going to have to be you. It's going to have to be you to send the email, the text, the phone call, the Snapchat, whatever it is. Or better yet, just go talk to them in person if you can and ask, "Hey, I think you're pretty cool and I'd like to get to know you more. Would you want to get coffee or lunch sometime?" Yeah, I know that sounds like weird, scary, strange, all of that stuff, but welcome to human connection. Like, we just kind of have to step into the awkwardness and wade through it in order to make that initial connection. This is what I did with one of my friends, Austin. So before I left my job and went to grad school, I was working with this guy named Austin, and he and I were becoming friends through work, just normal coworker stuff. And him and his wife were similar age as me and Bree. This was before Bree and I were married. And so I was thinking, okay, I'm still relatively new to the area. I don't really have that many deep friends. I need friends. I need people to connect with. I recognize the importance of connection. And so I thought this is somebody to connect with. And so we arranged to go out to lunch one day. And so I took him out to lunch. And in the conversation, I remember I just looked at him and I'd said like, "Hey, I think it's super important to be connected with others. I think we all need somebody who has our back, who we can reach out to, be friends with, somebody that we could call in the middle of the night in an emergency. I need friends. Do you want to be friends? And I know that's, again, super awkward, but that's what I did because that's what it takes. And he said yes. And so we've been friends ever since. Sometimes that's what it's going to take. Hopefully it can be a little less awkward with you. Hopefully you don't have to just say like, hey, do you want to be friends with me? Okay, we're friends now. Thanks. But no matter how it happens, no matter how this initial connection gets made, you still have to make it. It is hard, but necessary. And so find some people to do life with, to share things with, to share life with. And that's just one half of the connection. So I think we also need to have connection with ourselves. Here are a couple questions to chew on. Do you know the person in the mirror? Do you know yourself? Like deeply, truly, do you know who you are? Do you know why you do what you do? Do you know what motivates you? What drives you? What really excites you or what freaks you out? Do you know all of those things? Because that's super important. That is where you are going to be connected with yourself, and it's going to impact every other area of your life. Second question, do you like the person in the mirror? Do you know them? Do you like them? Is this somebody that you want to take care of? And that, I know it sounds kind of silly, but I think if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of people will be confronted with this question like, do I even like myself? Do I like the person I've become? Do I like the life I'm living? And that's a tough question. But that's one of the questions we need to ask. If you don't like yourself, you're going to have a hard time connecting with yourself. You're going to have a hard time taking care of yourself. But who else is responsible for taking care of you, especially if you're an adult? Out of the home of mom and dad, or if your mom and dad weren't around, or if any way they were absent, who is going to take care of you? Ultimately, you need to take care of you. You should be the one to care most about taking care of you. You can't just put that on somebody else, and I don't think anybody has the motivation the way you do. So, do you like the person in the mirror? Is the person in the mirror somebody that you are willing to take care of and to improve the life of and connect with? I think this is super important. I found it to be very true in my life that as long as I don't like myself, or as long as there are aspects of my life that I don't like, then there are things that are preventing me from connecting with myself, and there are things that I want to run away from, want to change. And so that's where we get into things like phone addiction, social media addiction, YouTube. To an extreme, you can go drinking, drugs, pornography, gambling. Like all of these things are just a Xanax to numb out and to distract ourselves from the parts of our lives that we don't like. If there's some area that you don't like, then you're probably going to face some of these things, some of these escape mechanisms, some of these coping mechanisms that help us get through the hard parts of life. That's a tip I want to share. Life coach Mark Kweppet, he talks about this a lot, and he really focused on this idea of escapism, that pornography especially, but it can be translated to drugs or alcohol or social media or video games or anything like that, that if we are trying to escape from this area, whatever area of our lives that we don't like, then the solution to that is to build a life that we don't want to escape from. Like if we're turning to this medication, this medicating behavior to avoid the pain of the thing we don't like, then a way to get through that is you have to build a life that you don't want to escape from. I'll get into that a little bit more here in just a second. The third question I wanted to ask is, do you have hobbies that you enjoy? Do you have ways to relax or de-stress that aren't self-destructive? Do you have something like reading a book or taking a bath or like a mindfulness meditation or something like that isn't self-destructive, isn't like pornography, drinking, drugs, anything like that, just an escape from your life, something that actually can help you de-stress. Maybe it's working out. Maybe it's exercise. I think many people would agree these are actually pretty healthy ways of coping with stress. But then there are the unhealthy ways as well. Like I mentioned, drugs, alcohol, porn, gambling, all that stuff. Do you have these things? That's part of being connected with yourself. Do I take care of myself in a way that is not destroying myself? Psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Am I actually taking care of myself? If I need to de-stress, then am I maybe putting on some lo-fi and reading a book, or lighting a nice aromatic candle or something like that? That's something that will increase connection with yourself. It's something that we need to pursue. And the last question I have for you is, do you have a purpose? Do you have work that is meaningful to you and brings value to others around you? And so this is all connected to building a life you don't want to escape from, building a life that you actually love living. Do you have work that fires you up, work that you're excited to go to in the morning? Man, I experienced this back in college. I had an internship that I just was so stoked about. And I remember the very first night, and for the whole first week, while the newness was still there, especially, I actually had trouble going to sleep. Like the night before we started, I had trouble going to sleep. I think I just laid awake in my bed for like an hour or two because I couldn't get to sleep. I was excited about this opportunity in front of me, the work I was going to be doing, knowing what that feels like. Now I have a target for what I want to chase in the future, for work that doesn't have to just be a job, but work that can be a career, and it can be purposeful, and it can be really meaningful. And it's stuff that I can pursue wholeheartedly and really enjoy, really love. So, do you have this work that you're excited to do? Do you have friends that are around you? Do you have hobbies that you can engage in and things that you can do to relax, things you can do in your downtime that are helpful and beneficial for you and kind of just give you a chance to maybe clear your head or take a break from, like in my case, I mentioned in a previous episode, I think, that with grad school and with my graduate assistantship, I spend so much of my day being mentally on my toes. I have to think quickly. I have to think deeply. I have to problem solve. And when I come home and when I want to rest from that, I just have to stop thinking. And so I could put on some music, usually some lo-fi music or some synthwave music. I could go for a walk on the treadmill or go for a walk outside. There are times where I've watched YouTube videos, just entertaining YouTube videos that don't make me think and don't make me, that aren't like harsh and critical. Anyway, do you have these hobbies that lead you to take care of yourself? With that, so if you don't have, especially in the realm, if you don't have work that is meaningful, I would recommend checking out Ken Coleman's book, From Paycheck to Purpose. And that's more for going from just a job to an actual career you love, going from something that's like, well, I hate this, but I just need money to pay the bills, to something that you actually love doing and can pay the bills. He also has a book called Find the Work You Were Wired to Do. So I would recommend checking out those two things. Yeah, for all of this, for connecting with yourself, I feel like this is the gospel I preach. Journaling, I've talked about it a lot. If I haven't talked about it on this podcast, I'm surprised. I think I've mentioned it at least a couple times. But this is what I recommend to everybody. My friends are probably sick with how much I talk about it, but it is really such a game changer. If you take some time to journal, to process your day and think about, here's what happened, here's what went well with my day, here's what went poorly, here's what I could do differently next time, things like that, that gives you a platform to think about some of these questions. Do I know the person in the mirror? You'll get to know yourself over time if you journal. Why you do the things you do, why you said the things you said, why you behave the way you do. That's all super valuable information. Do you like the person in the mirror? Well, this is going to be a great opportunity to reflect on, here are the things I did well, and maybe here are the things that I didn't do that well. And maybe some of those are going to be linked to an area of your life that you don't like. But you're going to have to know that first before you can change it. Awareness is the first step, as I like to say. Awareness is the first step. You have to be aware of what you don't like. You have to be aware of a problem before you can take steps toward finding a solution. And so this journal also gives you a platform to talk about like, oh, I hung out with some friends. We played soccer together. We went disc golfing together. We went normal golfing together. We did all these things. I went over to their house. We watched a movie. We joked. We laughed until our sides hurt. Like all that kind of stuff. You can write that down and celebrate that. And that's going to be really good. You get to evaluate, do I have hobbies that I enjoy? Do I have these people that I'm connected with? And you can also just journal about work things. Do you have a purpose? What are you doing that brings value and meaning into the world and that brings value and meaning to you? If you don't know what that is, journaling is a great place to start. I highly recommend it. You can ask the questions, what really motivates me? What do I care deeply about? Some people like answering the question, what does my heart break for? Because that can lead into meaningful work. You start getting invested in, for example, if your heart just breaks seeing the homeless population in your community, you could go volunteer at the local shelter or volunteer at a place that serves meals to homeless people. You could start going to do some of that, start dipping your toes and find some work along those lines that is deeply meaningful to you. You could go answer some questions of like, do I like the corporate setting? Do I like being around these people in a cubicle where I have, a boss to answer to and these expectations and all these meetings and things like that? Some people really love that because that in and of itself is a community to be involved in. Some people really hate that. Those are your, entrepreneurs of the world who probably at one point tried the corporate world and just was like, nah, this isn't for me. I need something a little bit more flexible, a little bit more where I'm in the driver's seat. And so then they went off and they had an idea and they ran with it. And so journaling is a great way to evaluate all that. Again, awareness is the first step. Journaling is the place where you figure this all out. All right. Well, I reached the end of my very long page of notes. Been talking for 41 minutes at this point, which is probably shorter on your end because I'm going to do some editing, cut out some of the pauses and whatnot. But yeah, what do you think about all this? Does this picture of addiction treatment, addiction recovery, does this ring true to you? Is this new? Is this startling? Does this motivate you to do something different in your own life or do something different with maybe there are people around you who are struggling with addiction? Does it encourage you to treat them differently? Johann Hari in the TED Talk, he said, once I recognized this, that connection is the opposite of addiction, that connection is what we really need, then I started approaching the addicts in my life, not with this moral thing of like, well, if you just had more willpower, if you had more discipline to just stop, then we would be good. The typical intervention model where people sit down with the addict and they're like, all right, if you don't stop, we are cutting you off. Like, we're not going to be here. Like, that is such a horrible thing to do to the addict, I think, in the grand scheme of things, especially in light of this research where connection is one of the biggest factors and difference makers in recovery. Then we are telling the addict, like, hey, if you don't stop, then we are going to take away the one thing that you need. We're going to take away your lifeline. Like, that is so destructive. It breaks my heart. Hari said, if we think about this juxtaposition of what I used to think about addicts and addiction recovery, and now the need for connection, now I'm trying to just ask them, hey, how can I love you best? How can I be involved in your life? Like, I'm reaching out more, I'm getting connected with them more because I know that will make a difference. And so maybe some of this knowledge brought something to mind. Maybe this is inspiring you to do a little differently, act a little differently. All right, well, I am at time for today. I think I got through what I wanted to talk about. Let me know if you have any thoughts, questions, leave them in the comments. I will see them. And so, until next time, look at your life. You're worth being well. Love you.